The DNA test results sat on my kitchen table for 3 days before I finally opened them. And when I did, my entire world shattered into a million pieces. The woman I'd been searching for my entire life, the birth mother who had supposedly abandoned me as a baby, wasn't just alive. She was rich, powerful, and had been living less than 20 miles away from me for decades, watching me struggle while she built an empire on the foundation of my stolen identity. My name is Natalie Brooks, and I'm 32 years old. I work as a forensic accountant at Meridian Financial Services, which means I'm very good at uncovering lies buried in numbers. What I never expected was to use those same skills to uncover the biggest lie of my own life. Growing up in the foster care system, I'd always been told the same story. My teenage mother couldn't care for me, so she made the difficult decision to give me up for adoption. The records were sealed, the trail cold. I spent my 20s accepting that some questions would never have answers. But then my adoptive mother passed away last year, and in her final moments, she whispered something that changed everything. "The blue file," she said, gripping my hand with surprising strength. "Under the loose floorboard in the attic. She paid them to keep you." I found the file 3 weeks later. Inside were documents that made my blood run cold. My birth mother hadn't given me up because she couldn't afford to keep me. She'd given me up because keeping me would have ruined her carefully constructed new life. And she'd paid the Riverside Children's Home a substantial sum to ensure I never found her. The woman's name was Margaret Thornfield. She was now the CEO of Thornfield Industries, a billion-dollar manufacturing company. She lived in a mansion in Oakwood Heights, drove a Tesla, and had 2 other children she'd kept and raised in luxury while I bounced between foster homes and ate government cheese. The documents revealed something even more sinister. Margaret hadn't just abandoned me, she'd actively worked to sabotage any attempts at reunion. Every time I'd submitted paperwork to find my birth parents, every time I'd hired a private investigator, every time I'd registered with reunion websites, she'd been alerted through her network of lawyers and had the inquiries buried. She'd been watching me my entire life, making sure I never got close enough to threaten her perfect world. I spent the next month researching Margaret Thornfield. What I found was a woman who had built her empire on lies, manipulation, and the suffering of others. Thornfield Industries had a history of environmental violations, worker exploitation, and tax evasion. She was untouchable because she had judges in her pocket and politicians on her payroll. But Margaret had made one crucial mistake. She'd underestimated the daughter she'd thrown away. The plan began to form slowly, like a photograph developing in a dark room. I couldn't just confront her, she'd have me silenced or discredited before I could say a word. I needed to be smarter, more methodical. I needed to destroy her the same way she'd destroyed any chance of us having a relationship. I started by getting close to her world. Using my skills as a forensic accountant, I applied for a position at Hartwell & Associates, the accounting firm that handled Thornfield Industries books. My credentials were impeccable. My references stellar. They hired me within a week. For 3 months, I worked diligently, professionally, earning the trust of my colleagues and superiors. I was assigned to several major accounts, but I volunteered for overtime whenever the Thornfield account needed attention. Slowly, carefully, I began to map out Margaret's financial empire. What I discovered was staggering. The woman was running a sophisticated money laundering operation through her company. She'd been funneling illegal campaign contributions to politicians, hiding assets in offshore accounts, and using her factories as fronts for moving dirty money. The scale of her crimes was breathtaking. But I needed more than just financial records. I needed to understand the woman who had given birth to me, then discarded me like garbage. I began following her. Margaret Thornfield was a creature of habit. Every Tuesday, she had lunch at Le Bernardin, a high-end restaurant downtown. Every Thursday, she attended charity galas and fundraisers, not out of genuine altruism, but to maintain her image as Oakwood Heights' most generous philanthropist. Every Sunday, she played tennis at the exclusive Riverside Country Club. I watched her laugh with friends who had no idea about the darkness beneath her polished surface. I watched her hug her legitimate children, my half-siblings, with a warmth she'd never shown me. I watched her receive awards for her charitable work, knowing that every dollar she donated was stolen from the workers she exploited. The first phase of my revenge was subtle. I began leaking information about Thornfield Industries' environmental violations to investigative journalists. Not enough to trace back to me, but enough to start asking uncomfortable questions. Stock prices began to dip. Shareholders started demanding answers. Margaret's response was predictable. She threw money at the problem, buying off regulators and silencing critics. But I'd anticipated this. For every fire she put out, I lit two more. The second phase was more personal. I discovered that Margaret's son, David, was struggling with gambling addiction. Her daughter, Helen, was having an affair with her married tennis instructor. Both were secrets that Margaret had been desperately trying to hide to protect her family's reputation. I didn't expose these secrets directly. Instead, I planted seeds of doubt, orchestrated chance encounters, and let nature take its course. David's gambling debts became public when he was caught stealing from his trust fund. Helen's affair exploded when his wife found love letters in his tennis bag, letters that I'd made sure she would find. Margaret's perfect family began to crumble, and with it, her carefully constructed public image. The third phase was the most dangerous. I needed to get inside her inner circle to have access to her most closely guarded secrets. Using a false identity, I applied to be her personal assistant. Margaret hired me herself, impressed by my credentials and my apparent dedication to her success. Working directly for the woman who had abandoned me was psychological torture. Every morning, I brought her coffee and pretended to care about her day. Every evening, I organized her schedule and smiled when she praised my efficiency. She had no idea that the woman she trusted with her most sensitive information was the daughter she'd thrown away 30 years ago. Being so close to her allowed me to plant evidence of her crimes where law enforcement would find it. I copied hard drives, photographed documents, and recorded conversations. I built an airtight case that would send her to prison for decades. But I wanted more than just justice. I wanted her to feel the same abandonment, the same betrayal that I'd felt my entire life. The opportunity came when Margaret decided to run for mayor of Oakwood Heights. She saw it as the natural next step in her climb to power. Her campaign was built on her image as a successful businesswoman and devoted mother who wanted to give back to her community. I waited until the night before the election. Margaret was ahead in the polls by 15 points. She was already planning her victory speech, already imagining herself as the most powerful woman in the city. That's when I released everything. The financial crimes, the environmental violations, the bribery, the corruption. It all came out at once. But the most damaging revelation was personal. I released the documents from my adoption file, showing how Margaret had abandoned her firstborn daughter to protect her image, then spent decades ensuring that daughter could never find her. I included photos of myself as a child in foster care, alongside photos of Margaret's legitimate children enjoying lives of luxury. I included copies of the payments she'd made to keep me hidden, the legal briefs she'd filed to prevent reunification, the investigators she'd hired to monitor my attempts to find her. The story went viral within hours. Margaret Thornfield, the woman who had built her political campaign on family values and corporate responsibility, was exposed as a fraud who had abandoned her own child and committed crimes for decades. But I wasn't finished. On election night, as Margaret watched her political career disintegrate on live television, I walked into her campaign headquarters. She was alone in her office, her staff having fled when the scandal broke. She looked up when I entered, and for a moment, I saw confusion in her eyes. "Who are you?" she asked. I smiled, pulling out my birth certificate, the one with her name listed as my mother. "I'm your daughter, Margaret, the one you threw away." The color drained from her face. She stared at the document, then at me. And I saw the exact moment when recognition dawned. I had her eyes, her nose, her stubborn chin. There was no denying the resemblance. "Natalie," she whispered. "You remember my name?" I'm touched. I sat down across from her, crossing my legs casually. "I wanted to introduce myself properly before they arrest you. You did this?" Her voice was barely audible. I did this, all of it. The leaked documents, the exposed crimes, the ruined reputation. I spent 2 years methodically destroying everything you built, just like you destroyed any chance of us having a relationship. Margaret tried to compose herself, to summon the commanding presence that had intimidated judges and politicians. But she was broken, defeated. What do you want? I wanted you to know what it feels like to lose everything, to have your family turn their backs on you, to face the future alone and afraid. I leaned forward. I wanted you to understand what you did to a 3-year-old girl who just wanted her mother. I was young. I made mistakes. I can make this right. No, you can't. You had 30 years to make this right. Instead, you chose to silence me, to keep me buried so I couldn't inconvenience your perfect life. You chose to let me believe I was unwanted while you played loving mother to your other children. Margaret began to cry, and for a moment, I felt a flicker of sympathy. But then I remembered all the nights I'd cried myself to sleep in foster homes, wondering why my mother hadn't loved me enough to keep me. The FBI will be here soon, I continued. They have everything they need to convict you. The financial crimes alone will put you away for 20 years. The political corruption adds another decade. You'll die in prison, alone and forgotten. Please, she begged. I'll give you anything, money, properties, whatever you want. I don't want your money. I want you to live with the consequences of your choices, just like I had to live with them. I stood up, straightening my jacket. Your legitimate children have already distanced themselves from you. David is in rehab, and Helen is filing for divorce from her husband. They're ashamed to be associated with you. You have no friends left, no allies, no one who will stand by you. Margaret collapsed into her chair, sobbing. I'm sorry. I'm so sorry. I know you are. But sorry doesn't change 30 years of abandonment. Sorry doesn't change the fact that you chose to destroy me rather than face the consequences of your actions. I walked toward the door, then paused. Oh, and Margaret? I want you to know that I turned out just fine without you. I'm successful, educated, and respected. I built a life for myself despite your attempts to keep me down. I'm everything you pretended to be, except I'm genuine. The FBI agents were waiting in the hallway when I left Margaret's office. They arrested her 20 minutes later, leading her away in handcuffs while news cameras captured every moment of her humiliation. The trial lasted 6 months. Margaret was convicted on all counts and sentenced to 35 years in federal prison. Thornfield Industries collapsed, taking with it the jobs of thousands of workers. Collateral damage I regretted but couldn't prevent. David overcame his gambling addiction and now works as a counselor for other addicts. Helen rebuilt her life and started a nonprofit organization for abandoned children. Both of them reached out to me, wanting to build a relationship with their half-sister. I wasn't ready for that yet, but I kept their letters. As for me, I left Oakwood Heights and started over in a new city. I opened my own forensic accounting practice, specializing in exposing financial crimes. I'm good at it, maybe because I understand what it's like to be lied to have the truth hidden from you. Sometimes people ask me if I regret what I did to Margaret. The answer is complicated. I regret the pain I caused her other children, the workers who lost their jobs, the innocent people who were caught in the crossfire. But I don't regret exposing her crimes or holding her accountable for abandoning me. Margaret Thornfield made choices that destroyed lives, starting with mine. She chose money and status over her own daughter. She chose to silence me rather than face her past. She chose to build an empire on lies and corruption. I simply made sure she faced the consequences of those choices. Justice isn't always pretty. Sometimes it's messy, painful, and leaves scars that never fully heal. But it's necessary. Margaret spent 30 years believing she was untouchable, that she could discard people without consequence. She was wrong. I visit her in prison once a year, on my birthday. Not to gloat or to hurt her further, but to remind both of us that actions have consequences. She's aged rapidly in prison, her perfect facade crumbling without the army of stylists and doctors who once maintained her image. During our last visit, She looked at me with eyes that seemed genuinely regretful. I loved you, she said quietly. I just wasn't brave enough to keep you. I know, I replied. But love without action is just sentiment. You had 30 years to prove you loved me, and instead you chose to erase me. She nodded, accepting the truth of my words. I'm proud of who you became. Despite everything, you're stronger than I ever was. I had to be strong. You didn't give me a choice. As I left the prison that day, I felt something I hadn't experienced in years. Closure. Not forgiveness. That might come someday. Or it might not. But closure. The questions that had haunted me my entire life finally had answers, even if those answers were painful. Margaret Thornfield had been a coward who chose the easy path at every turn. She'd abandoned her daughter, built an empire on lies, and spent decades running from the truth. In the end, the truth caught up with her, as it always does. I'm not proud of everything I did to bring her down. Revenge is a dangerous game that can consume you if you're not careful. But I'm proud that I survived her abandonment, that I built a life worth living, and that I had the courage to face the truth when I found it. The little girl who was thrown away grew up to be a woman who couldn't be silenced. And sometimes, that's justice enough. My name is Natalie Brooks. I'm 34 years old now. And I'm no longer defined by the woman who gave birth to me and walked away. I'm defined by the choices I've made, the life I've built, and the truth I was brave enough to uncover. The search for my birth mother is over. The real journey, learning to live with the answers, has just begun.